Hey there, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm so glad you found this video today because what we're about to discuss might just change how you understand yourself or someone close to you. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that affects millions of people, yet often goes unrecognized or misunderstood: avoidance behavior personality. Have you ever noticed yourself backing away from opportunities that require you to put yourself out there? Or maybe you've watched someone you care about consistently choose the safer path, even when it meant missing out on something they really wanted. These patterns aren't just random choices, they often point to something deeper happening beneath the surface. Avoidance behavior refers to the tendency to escape or prevent situations that cause discomfort, anxiety, or emotional pain. When these behaviors form a consistent pattern and become intertwined with how we see ourselves and navigate the world, they become part of our personality structure. This isn't just about being shy or introverted, it's about a fundamental way of relating to the world that prioritizes protection from potential hurt over potential growth. In today's video, we'll walk through what avoidance behavior looks like, where it comes from, how it manifests in daily life, and most importantly, how to recognize it in yourself and take steps toward positive change. We'll also discuss how to support someone you care about who might be struggling with these patterns. Alright, let's get started by understanding what we mean by avoidant personality and how it differs from occasional avoidance that we all experience. Understanding avoidant personality. Let's start by making an important distinction. All of us avoid things sometimes, it's a normal human response. We might postpone a difficult conversation, put off going to the dentist, or skip a social event when we're feeling drained. That's situational avoidance, and it's typically temporary and context-specific. Avoidant personality, however, represents a more pervasive pattern. It's when avoidance becomes a primary coping strategy and a defining feature of how someone navigates life. At its most extreme and clinically significant form, we have what's called Avoidant Personality Disorder, or AvPD. Avoidant Personality Disorder is recognized in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM-5, as a condition characterized by extreme social inhibition, feelings of inadequacy, and hypersensitivity to negative evaluation. People with AvPD experience an intense fear of rejection that leads them to avoid social situations unless they're certain of being liked. They often view themselves as socially inept or personally unappealing, and are extremely reluctant to take personal risks or engage in new activities. But here's where it gets interesting, and why this video is relevant to many more people than those with a clinical diagnosis. Avoidance behaviors exist on a spectrum. Many people who would never meet the threshold for a clinical diagnosis still experience significant avoidant tendencies that affect their quality of life. Let me share a couple of examples to illustrate this spectrum. Imagine Alex, who feels nervous before social gatherings but still attends them, albeit with some initial discomfort that eventually fades as the event progresses. Alex experiences situational social anxiety but doesn't have a pervasive avoidant pattern. Then there's Jamie, who consistently turns down invitations, has elaborate excuses ready, and experiences intense anxiety at the mere thought of social evaluation. Jamie has built a life that accommodates this avoidance, working remotely, socializing primarily online, and sticking to a small circle of trusted friends. This represents significant avoidant tendencies that impact daily functioning, even if they don't necessarily meet the threshold for AvPD. So why does this spectrum matter? Because understanding where you fall on it can help you recognize patterns that might be limiting your life without pathologizing normal human experiences of anxiety or discomfort. It's also worth noting that avoidant personality traits can overlap with other conditions. For instance, social anxiety disorder shares many features with avoidant patterns, but focuses more specifically on social situations rather than a broader pattern of risk and emotional avoidance. Similarly, some features of avoidant personality can overlap with certain attachment styles, particularly anxious and fearful attachment. Let's take a moment to consider how common these patterns are. Research suggests that about 2.5% of the general population might meet criteria for avoidant personality disorder, but many more, perhaps as many as 10 to 20% of people, experience significant avoidant traits that affect their quality of life without meeting full diagnostic criteria. And contrary to what some might assume, avoidant patterns aren't just extreme introversion or shyness. Many people with avoidant tendencies deeply desire connection and engagement with others, they're just terrified of the potential for rejection or humiliation that might come with it. It's less about preference and more about fear. Common signs and traits. 1. Hypersensitivity to criticism. One of the most fundamental traits of avoidant personality is an extreme sensitivity to criticism or negative feedback. This isn't just feeling momentarily disappointed when someone points out a mistake, it's experiencing criticism as deeply threatening to one's sense of self. For example, imagine receiving a performance review at work that's 90% positive but includes one area for improvement. Someone with avoidant traits might obsess over that single critique, replay it constantly in their mind, and feel that it confirms their deepest fears about being inadequate, despite all the positive feedback they received. This hypersensitivity often leads to defensive reactions. You might notice yourself or someone else becoming visibly upset or shutting down when receiving even mild feedback. Going to great lengths to prevent situations where evaluation might occur. Perfectionism as a way to avoid criticism. Remembering negative feedback for years while quickly forgetting praise. 2. Fear of rejection and abandonment. Closely related to criticism sensitivity is an intense fear of rejection and abandonment. For someone with avoidant tendencies, rejection isn't just disappointing, it feels catastrophic and confirming of their worst fears about themselves. This might look like constantly scanning relationships for signs of potential rejection. Preemptively ending relationships when they start to become close. Reluctance to share personal information or be vulnerable. Creating tests for others to prove their commitment. Interpreting neutral actions as signs of rejection, like a delayed text response. I once worked with a client who described it this way: I'm constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. When things are going well in a relationship, I don't feel happy, I feel anxious because I know it's just a matter of time before they see the real me and leave. 3. Social inhibition and withdrawal. While many people experience occasional social anxiety, those with avoidant personality patterns tend to have persistent discomfort in social situations, especially with unfamiliar people. This might manifest as appearing quiet or reserved in group settings. Declining invitations to social events, especially those involving new people. Intense anxiety before social gatherings. Physical symptoms like sweating, rapid heartbeat, or nausea in social settings. Difficulty speaking up in meetings or group discussions. Preferring online communication where interactions feel safer and more controllable. Here's a scenario that might sound familiar: you're invited to a work social event. Although part of you wants to go and connect with colleagues, you spend days dreading it, imagining all the ways you might embarrass yourself or be judged. When the day arrives, you either force yourself to go but stay glued to the wall or find a last-minute excuse to cancel altogether. 4. Reluctance to take risks. Avoidant personalities tend to be extremely risk-averse, particularly when it comes to emotional risks or situations with uncertain outcomes. This often looks like staying in unsatisfying but predictable situations, jobs, relationships, living arrangements. Decision paralysis when facing choices with uncertain outcomes. Needing excessive reassurance before making changes. Passing up opportunities for advancement that would involve greater visibility. Difficulty trying new activities without extensive preparation. Preferring familiar routines even when they're limiting. I recall a conversation with someone who stayed in the same entry-level job for 15 years, despite having talents that could have taken them much further in their career. When asked why, they said, "At least here, I know exactly what's expected of me. I know I can do this job without failing. What if I tried something else and couldn't handle it?" 5. Self-isolation and limited relationships. People with avoidant tendencies often have a smaller social circle and may struggle to develop close relationships. You might notice having few close friends despite desiring connection. Spending excessive time alone, not out of preference but due to fear. Relationships that stay on a surface level with limited intimacy. Difficulty trusting others with personal information. Reluctance to introduce romantic partners to friends or family. Creating elaborate reasons why relationships wouldn't work out anyway. 6. Negative self-image and self-critical thinking. At the core of avoidant personality is often a deeply negative self-perception and harsh inner critic. This typically includes persistent feelings of inadequacy compared to others. Believing oneself to be socially inept, unappealing, or inferior. Harsh self-talk that far exceeds the criticism one would direct at others. Difficulty accepting compliments or positive feedback. Tendency to attribute successes to luck and failures to personal flaws. Overwhelming shame about perceived deficiencies. 7. Emotional restraint and avoidance. Many people with avoidant tendencies struggle not just with external situations but with their own emotions as well. This can look like difficulty identifying or expressing feelings. Discomfort with strong emotions, positive or negative. Using distraction to avoid uncomfortable feelings. Intellectualizing emotions rather than experiencing them. Physical symptoms that might represent suppressed emotions. 8. Need for certainty and reassurance. Avoidant personalities often have an intense need for certainty before proceeding with actions. This might manifest as excessive planning and preparation for routine events. Seeking repeated reassurance from others. Difficulty with situations that have ambiguous social rules. Creating scripts for anticipated interactions. Resistance to spontaneity or unplanned activities. 9. Fantasizing as escape. Interestingly, many people with avoidant tendencies have rich fantasy lives that serve as a substitute for actual engagement with the world. This might include elaborate daydreams about success, relationships, or recognition. Using fantasy as emotional compensation for real-world limitations. Preference for fictional worlds, books, movies, games, over real social interaction. Creating idealized versions of relationships that real people could never live up to. Take a moment to reflect, do you recognize any of these patterns in yourself or someone you care about? Remember, having some of these traits doesn't necessarily indicate a disorder. Many of us have avoidant tendencies in certain contexts or during particularly stressful times in our lives. However, if you find that several of these descriptions feel uncomfortably familiar and create consistent limitations in your life, it might be worth exploring further. Understanding these patterns is the first step toward being able to work with them effectively. Causes and root origins. Understanding why avoidant patterns develop can be crucial for addressing them effectively. As with most personality traits, avoidant tendencies typically emerge from a complex interplay of biological, psychological, and social factors. Let's explore each of these dimensions. Biological factors. There appears to be a genetic component to personality traits related to anxiety, behavioral inhibition, and emotional sensitivity. Research with twins suggests that temperament, our inborn tendencies towards certain emotional and behavioral responses, plays a significant role in vulnerability to developing avoidant patterns. Some people are born with what psychologists call a behaviorally inhibited temperament. These individuals tend to be more sensitive to novelty and potential threat from an early age. Studies show that babies who demonstrate high reactivity to new stimuli are more likely to develop anxiety and avoidance behaviors later in life. Neuroscience research has also identified differences in brain functioning that may contribute to avoidant tendencies. For instance, some individuals show heightened activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, in response to social stimuli. This may create a neurological predisposition toward interpreting social situations as threatening. Additionally, differences in neurotransmitter systems, particularly those involving serotonin and dopamine, may influence how readily someone experiences anxiety in social situations or in response to uncertainty. Dr. Jerome Kagan, a pioneering researcher in temperament, found that about 15 to 20% of infants show signs of high reactivity that often develops into behavioral inhibition in childhood. This isn't deterministic, Not all highly reactive infants develop avoidant personalities, but it does suggest a biological vulnerability that may be present from birth. Developmental experiences. While biology may create vulnerabilities, it's typically life experiences, particularly during formative years, that shape these tendencies into persistent personality patterns. Early attachment relationships. One of the most crucial factors in the development of avoidant patterns is early attachment relationships, particularly with primary caregivers. Attachment theory, pioneered by John Bowlby and expanded by Mary Ainsworth, suggests that our early experiences of care profoundly influence how we view ourselves, others, and relationships throughout life. Several attachment-related experiences may contribute to avoidant personality development. Inconsistent responsiveness. When caregivers are unpredictably responsive to a child's needs, the child may develop anxiety about whether their needs will be met, along with strategies to minimize dependency on others. Rejection or criticism. Caregivers who frequently criticize, mock, or reject a child's emotional needs may teach that child that vulnerability is dangerous and that they must hide their true self to be accepted. Conditional approval. When love and acceptance seem contingent on achievement or behavior rather than being unconditional, children may develop the belief that they must be perfect to be worthy of love. Overprotection. Paradoxically, parents who are overly protective and shield children from all discomfort can prevent them from developing confidence in their ability to handle challenges, potentially fostering avoidance of difficult situations. It's important to note that these patterns don't require abusive parenting. Even well-intentioned parents who themselves struggle with anxiety or who face their own attachment difficulties may inadvertently create conditions that foster avoidant tendencies in their children. Traumatic or adverse experiences. Beyond attachment relationships, specific adverse experiences can contribute to the development of avoidant patterns. Bullying or social rejection, experiences of being ostracized, ridiculed, or excluded, particularly during sensitive developmental periods like adolescence, can create lasting fears about social evaluation. Public humiliation, instances of being shamed or embarrassed in front of others can create enduring anxiety about similar situations. Chronic invalidation, when a person's feelings, perceptions, or experiences are consistently denied or minimized, they may learn to doubt their own internal experiences and avoid expressing themselves. Cultural displacement, moving between cultures or being part of a minority culture that is devalued by the dominant culture can create painful experiences of not belonging that may foster avoidance. Research by Dr. Martin Teicher at Harvard Medical School has shown that various forms of childhood adversity can actually alter brain development in ways that heighten sensitivity to threat and potentially contribute to avoidant patterns. His work suggests that the timing, type, and duration of adverse experiences can have specific effects on different brain regions involved in stress response and social functioning. Sociocultural factors. Beyond individual biology and personal experiences, broader sociocultural factors can also influence the development and expression of avoidant tendencies. Cultural values. Some cultures place higher value on qualities associated with avoidance, such as modesty, restraint, and deference to authority. In these contexts, behaviors that might be seen as problematically avoidant in one culture may be viewed as appropriate or even desirable in another. Family systems. Patterns of communication and emotional expression within families can either reinforce or help overcome avoidant tendencies. Families that discourage emotional expression or have rigid boundaries may inadvertently foster avoidance. Gender socialization. Traditional gender norms often shape how avoidance is expressed and interpreted. For instance, avoidant behaviors in boys may be more likely to be labeled as problematic, while similar behaviors in girls might be normalized or even encouraged as feminine. Educational environments. School settings that emphasize performance and competition without adequate emotional support may intensify fears of failure and evaluation in vulnerable children. Maintaining factors. Once avoidant patterns develop, several factors tend to maintain and reinforce them over time. Negative reinforcement. Avoidance behaviors are powerfully reinforced because they provide immediate relief from anxiety. When someone avoids a feared situation, their anxiety decreases, which teaches the brain that avoidance works as a strategy. Confirmation bias. People with avoidant tendencies often selectively attend to information that confirms their fears while discounting contradictory evidence. Safety behaviors, subtle avoidance strategies like overpreparation, seeking excessive reassurance, or mental rehearsal may allow someone to endure anxiety-provoking situations but prevent them from learning that they could cope without these measures. Social skills deficits. As avoidance persists, opportunities to develop social skills and confidence are missed, creating actual skills deficits that make social situations more challenging, thereby reinforcing avoidance. A complex picture. It's worth emphasizing that avoidant patterns rarely have a single cause. Instead, they typically emerge from a complex interplay of vulnerabilities and experiences. Someone with an inhibited temperament might develop healthy social confidence with supportive parenting, while someone without such temperamental vulnerability might still develop avoidant patterns following significant relational trauma. Dr. Jeffrey Young, the founder of schema therapy, describes 5 core emotional needs that all humans share: secure attachment, autonomy, freedom to express emotions, spontaneity, and realistic limits. When these needs are inadequately met in childhood, maladaptive schemas or belief patterns can develop, including those that underlie avoidant personality. What does this mean for someone struggling with avoidant patterns now? Understanding these origins isn't about assigning blame, especially to parents who were doing the best they could with the resources and awareness they had. Rather, it's about developing compassion for how these patterns developed as adaptive responses to difficult circumstances, even if they're no longer serving you well. This understanding can also guide approaches to change. For instance, recognizing the powerful role of early attachment experiences might suggest that working with a therapist to develop a secure therapeutic relationship could be particularly healing for avoidant patterns. Now that we've explored where avoidant tendencies typically come from, let's look at how they show up in daily life across various contexts and relationships. Examples of avoidance in daily life. Avoidant behavior doesn't just exist as an abstract psychological concept, it manifests in countless small and large ways throughout daily life. Let's explore how avoidance typically plays out across different domains, with realistic examples that might help you recognize these patterns in yourself or others. In romantic relationships. Romantic relationships often trigger avoidant patterns most intensely because they involve such high levels of vulnerability and potential for rejection. The almost relationship pattern. Meet Maya. She's intelligent, creative, and secretly longs for a deep connection. Yet her dating life follows a predictable pattern: she meets someone, feels initial chemistry, and things progress promisingly for a few weeks. But as soon as the relationship starts to deepen, when her new partner wants to introduce her to friends or have more meaningful conversations, Maya begins to pull away. She suddenly remembers all the reasons they're not compatible. She becomes hyper-aware of small flaws she previously overlooked. She tells herself, it would never work anyway, and gradually becomes less available until the relationship fizzles out. The painful irony. Maya genuinely wants a relationship but unconsciously sabotages any connection that might lead to one. The emotional fortress. Then there's James, who's been married for 12 years. Unlike Maya, he's committed to his relationship on paper, but emotionally, he maintains considerable distance. When his wife tries to discuss feelings or relationship issues, James intellectualizes, changes the subject, or suddenly remembers urgent work that needs attention. He's present physically but emotionally unavailable. Sex has become mechanical rather than intimate. His wife describes feeling alone together, technically partnered but missing the emotional connection that makes relationships fulfilling. James isn't consciously trying to hurt his wife, he's protecting himself from vulnerability in the only way he knows how. The anxious avoidant dance. Consider the common dynamic between Alex, who has anxious tendencies, and Jordan, who leans avoidant. When Jordan becomes distant, Alex becomes increasingly desperate for connection and reassurance. This triggers Jordan's avoidance even more strongly, creating a painful cycle. Jordan might think, if I just had more space, I'd feel better about the relationship, while Alex thinks, if Jordan would just open up more, I wouldn't feel so insecure. Neither understands that they're caught in a reinforcing pattern that often needs outside help to break. You know that meme about straight men going to therapy just to save their relationships? There's a grain of truth there. Avoidant patterns in relationships often don't change until the pain of continuing outweighs the fear of vulnerability. In career and work life. Work environments, with their hierarchies, evaluations, and social dynamics, create numerous triggers for avoidant behaviors. The perpetual underachiever. Take Eliza, a talented graphic designer whose portfolio shows exceptional creativity. Yet 5 years into her career, she's still in an entry-level position, watching less talented colleagues get promoted past her. Why? Eliza never puts herself forward for advancement opportunities. She doesn't share her best ideas in meetings for fear they'll be criticized. When a promotion opportunity arises, she convinces herself she's not ready yet or needs to develop more skills first. Eliza's manager has no idea she's interested in advancement because Eliza has never communicated it. From the outside, she appears content with her position. Internally, she feels increasingly resentful and stuck. The feedback avoider. Then there's Marcus, a mid-level manager who's known for being too nice to his direct reports. He avoids giving constructive feedback even when performance issues are evident. He'll spend hours trying to fix a subordinate's work himself rather than having a potentially uncomfortable conversation about quality expectations. When annual reviews come around, Marcus gives everyone glowing evaluations, not because they all deserve them, but because he can't bear the thought of someone being upset with him. The result? His team isn't growing professionally, and upper management questions his judgment. The professional ghost. Consider Robin, a freelance writer who produces excellent work but has severe anxiety about client communications. She'll spend days perfecting a project but then delay submitting it because the moment of evaluation feels too threatening. She frequently misses deadlines because she's endlessly revising, trying to make her work criticism-proof. When clients request changes, she takes it as devastating personal failure rather than a normal part of the creative process. Robin has lost several steady clients not because of her work quality, but because her communication avoidance makes her unreliable and difficult to collaborate with. If you've ever spent 2 hours crafting a 2-sentence email, or felt physical relief when a meeting gets cancelled, you might recognize some of these workplace avoidance patterns. In friendships and social life. Social connections outside of romance and work also provide numerous contexts where avoidant patterns emerge. The cancellation king/queen. Meet Aiden, who genuinely likes his friends and often accepts invitations in the moment with sincere intentions to attend. But as the event approaches, his anxiety mounts. He begins to imagine all the awkward moments that might occur, the judgments others might make, the effort of sustaining conversation. By the day of the event, he's convinced himself he's coming down with something and sends his regrets. Aiden's friends have learned not to count on his attendance. What they don't know is how much he agonizes over these decisions and how isolated he feels afterward. The social chameleon. Then there's Lily, who appears socially confident and has a wide circle of acquaintances. What isn't obvious is that Lily has become expert at being whoever she thinks others want her to be. She carefully monitors conversations for cues about what opinions are acceptable and adapts accordingly. Lily has many people who consider her a friend, but she secretly feels that none of them know the real her. Her relationships stay at a surface level because authentic connection would require revealing parts of herself she fears would be rejected. In relationship to self. Perhaps the most profound domain of avoidance isn't about external relationships at all, but about how we relate to ourselves, our thoughts, feelings, needs, and authentic desires. The emotional suppressor. Meet Theo, who prides himself on being rational and not driven by emotions. He's developed an impressive ability to intellectualize experiences that most would find emotionally charged. When asked how he feels about significant life events, he can tell you what he thinks about them but struggles to access or articulate emotions. Beneath this rational exterior, unexpressed emotions accumulate. Occasionally they erupt in seemingly disproportionate anger over minor triggers, or manifest as physical symptoms like tension headaches or digestive issues. The identity avoider. Then there's Jamie, who has spent decades trying to be who others need or expect. From choosing a career path to please parents, to adopting hobbies their partner enjoys, to dressing in ways that don't attract attention, Jamie has made countless accommodations to external expectations. At 45, Jamie has a successful career and stable relationship but increasingly experiences a sense of emptiness and the disturbing question, who am I really, beneath all these adaptations? Facing this question feels both urgent and terrifying. The self-care postponer. Consider Wei, who is attentive and responsive to everyone else's needs while consistently neglecting her own. She delays medical checkups, works through lunch breaks, and never uses her vacation days. When she does have free time, she fills it with tasks and obligations rather than rest or activities she enjoys. Wei's avoidance isn't of external situations but of her own needs and uncomfortable emotions that might arise in stillness. Perpetual busyness serves as a strategy to avoid facing her own dissatisfaction or deeper questions about her life's direction. This form of avoidance, the avoidance of our own authentic selves, may be the most painful in the long run. As Carl Jung reportedly said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. The cost of consistent avoidance. What all these examples share is a poignant paradox. Avoidance behaviors aim to protect us from pain, judgment, or rejection, yet over time, they often create the very suffering they were meant to prevent. Maya avoids vulnerability to protect herself from potential heartbreak, yet finds herself chronically lonely. Marcus avoids giving feedback to maintain harmony, yet loses the respect of both his team and his superiors. Sophia minimizes family time to avoid criticism, yet feels increasingly alienated from her relatives. The protective intent behind avoidance is understandable and even wise in certain contexts. There are genuinely harmful situations where avoidance is appropriate. The problem arises when avoidance becomes an automatic, generalized response disconnected from present reality. Take a moment to reflect. Do you recognize any of these patterns in your life? If so, approach this recognition with curiosity rather than judgment. These behaviors developed for understandable reasons and have likely been protective in some ways. At the same time, becoming aware of them is the first step toward choosing whether they still serve you. Now that we've explored how avoidance manifests across different life domains, let's examine the broader impact these patterns can have on mental health and overall well-being. Impact on life and mental health. Persistent avoidance behaviors, while offering short-term relief from anxiety, often extract significant long-term costs across multiple dimensions of health and well-being. Understanding these impacts can provide crucial motivation for the challenging work of changing avoidant patterns. Emotional and psychological impact. Anxiety maintenance and intensification. One of the most significant psychological impacts of avoidance is that it actually maintains and often worsens the very anxiety it's meant to alleviate. This happens through a mechanism psychologists call negative reinforcement. When avoiding a feared situation reduces anxiety in the moment, the brain learns that avoidance works as a strategy, making you more likely to avoid similar situations in the future. However, each instance of avoidance prevents you from having the critical experience of facing a fear and discovering you can handle it. Without these corrective experiences, anxiety tends to generalize and intensify over time. What begins as anxiety about public speaking might gradually expand to anxiety about speaking in small groups, then to one-on-one conversations with new people, and so on. Dr. David Barlow, a pioneering researcher in anxiety disorders, describes this as the fear of fear cycle, where the anticipatory anxiety about having anxiety becomes more problematic than the original trigger. Depression and demoralization. Chronic avoidance often leads to experiences of demoralization and depression. When people consistently avoid challenges, they miss opportunities to develop mastery and self-efficacy, the confident belief in their ability to handle difficult situations. Over time, this can create a pervasive sense of helplessness and inadequacy. The inner narrative becomes, I can't handle things that others seem to manage easily, or I'm fundamentally less capable than other people. These beliefs, combined with the narrowing of life that often accompanies avoidance, create fertile ground for depressive symptoms. Research consistently shows strong correlations between avoidant coping styles and depressive symptoms. A 2018 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Affective Disorders found that avoidant coping was one of the strongest predictors of depression severity across diverse populations. Identity and self-concept complications. Persistent avoidance can significantly impact how people see themselves. When someone regularly avoids expressing opinions, pursuing desires, or revealing authentic aspects of themselves, their sense of identity may become diffuse or externally defined. Many people with strong avoidant patterns report feeling like they're living someone else's life or playing a role rather than authentically existing. They may struggle to answer seemingly basic questions about their preferences, values, or desires because they've habitually deferred to others or chosen based on what would minimize potential criticism. This identity diffusion creates a painful disconnect between one's internal experience and external presentation. As psychologist Carl Rogers described it, there develops a growing gap between the real self and the ideal self that can lead to psychological distress and a sense of inauthenticity. Shame and self-criticism. Avoidant patterns both stem from and perpetuate cycles of shame and self-criticism. Unlike guilt, which involves feeling bad about specific behaviors, shame involves feeling bad about who you fundamentally are. People with avoidant tendencies often experience a deep sense that something is wrong with them at a core level. Each instance of avoidance can trigger self-criticism, I should have been able to handle that, which intensifies shame, which then increases the motivation to avoid similar situations in the future, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. Researcher Brené Brown, known for her work on shame and vulnerability, described shame as the intensely painful feeling that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Her research suggests that shame thrives in secrecy and isolation, conditions that avoidance behaviors tend to create and maintain. Impact on relationships and social functioning. Relationship limitations. Avoidance creates significant barriers to forming and maintaining fulfilling relationships. When someone consistently avoids vulnerability, conflict, or authentic self-expression, their relationships tend to remain surface level or become one-sided. For those in committed relationships, avoidant patterns can create painful dynamics where one partner feels consistently shut out or responsible for managing all emotional aspects of the relationship. Over time, this emotional imbalance can lead to resentment, disconnection, and relationship breakdown. Dr. Sue Johnson, developer of emotionally focused therapy, describes how avoidant attachment patterns create protest behavior in partners, who may escalate their attempts to connect, creating a pursue-withdraw cycle that further entrenches the avoidant person's tendency to distance themselves. Social isolation. The cumulative effect of social avoidance is often progressive isolation. As invitations are declined, social skills become rusty, and the perceived gap between oneself and others widens, social withdrawal can become self-reinforcing. This isolation is particularly painful because it typically doesn't reflect a genuine preference for solitude but rather a fear-driven retreat from desired connection. Many people with avoidant tendencies report intense loneliness alongside their fear of engagement, a painful double bind. Research consistently shows that social isolation is associated with numerous negative health outcomes, including increased risk for cardiovascular disease, reduced immune function, cognitive decline, and overall mortality rates comparable to those associated with smoking or obesity. Interpersonal conflicts. While many avoidant behaviors aim to prevent conflict, they can paradoxically create it in several ways. Important issues remain unaddressed until they become crises. Partners or friends feel frustrated by perceived indifference or disengagement. Misunderstandings multiply when direct communication is avoided. Others may feel they must take on disproportionate responsibility in shared endeavors. These conflicts then reinforce the avoidant person's belief that relationships are dangerous or too complicated, creating another self-fulfilling prophecy. Impact on career and achievement. Limited professional advancement. Career trajectories are often significantly affected by avoidant patterns. Opportunities for advancement typically require visibility, self-advocacy, risk-taking, and comfort with evaluation, all challenging for those with avoidant tendencies. People with strong avoidance may decline opportunities to present their work or ideas. Avoid applying for promotions until they feel perfectly prepared. Hesitate to negotiate salaries or benefits. Choose positions below their capability level to minimize evaluation. Limit networking that could advance their career. Over time, these patterns can create a growing gap between potential and achievement, often leading to career stagnation and financial implications. Creative and intellectual constraints. Avoidance can significantly constrain creative and intellectual development. Innovation requires willingness to present incomplete ideas, receive criticism, fail publicly, and persist through uncertainty, all particularly challenging for those with avoidant tendencies. Many creative fields involve subjective evaluation and rejection as inherent aspects of the process. Those with avoidant patterns may protect themselves by never sharing their creative work, abandoning projects when they approach completion, and thus potential evaluation, creating work that's safe rather than authentic or innovative, limiting their creative identity to private expression. Some of history's most meaningful creative and intellectual contributions came from people willing to face rejection and criticism. When avoidance prevents this willingness, not only does the individual lose opportunities for growth, but the broader community loses potential contributions. Physical health impacts. Stress-related physical symptoms. The chronic stress associated with avoidance patterns can manifest in numerous physical symptoms. When emotions aren't processed adaptively, they often express themselves through the body. Common physical manifestations include tension headaches and migraines, digestive issues, IBS, acid reflux, stomach pain, muscle tension and associated pain, disrupted sleep patterns, compromised immune function, fatigue and reduced energy. Dr. Gabor Mate's research on the connection between emotional suppression and physical health suggests that chronic hiding of authentic feelings creates physiological stress that contributes to various health conditions. Unhealthy coping behaviors. To manage the anxiety and other difficult emotions that accompany avoidant patterns, some people develop secondary coping mechanisms that can impact physical health, such as substance use to reduce social anxiety or emotional discomfort, emotional eating or food restriction, excessive screen time as escape from present experience, overworking as distraction from emotional needs, procrastination leading to unnecessary stress and pressure. These coping strategies may provide short-term relief but often create additional health challenges over time. Delayed medical care. A particularly concerning form of avoidance involves delaying necessary medical care due to anxiety about receiving potentially bad news, being physically vulnerable with healthcare providers, being judged for health habits or conditions, medical procedures or treatments. This avoidance can result in conditions being identified at more advanced stages or preventable complications developing due to delayed treatment. The paradox of protection. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of avoidance's impact is what psychologists sometimes call the paradox of protection. The very behaviors intended to protect from pain often become the primary source of suffering in a person's life. By avoiding situations that might involve rejection, criticism, or failure, people with avoidant tendencies also avoid opportunities for connection, growth, achievement, and joy. The short-term relief of avoidance comes at the cost of long-term fulfillment and well-being. As acceptance and commitment therapy founder Stephen Hayes puts it, the problem is that the mind's solution to discomfort is often more harmful than what it is trying to avoid. The narrowing of life. Over time, persistent avoidance tends to create an increasingly restricted life. As more situations, emotions, and experiences become categorized as too threatening, the sphere of comfortable existence gradually shrinks. This narrowing often happens slowly enough that it's not immediately apparent, like the proverbial frog in gradually heating water. Someone might begin by avoiding large social gatherings, then smaller groups, then one-on-one interactions with new people, until their social world consists of just a few safe relationships. The resulting limitation isn't just practical but existential, a sense of living a partial life, of watching opportunities pass by from behind a protective but isolating wall. Have you noticed areas of your life becoming more restricted over time? Places you no longer go, people you no longer interact with, activities you've given up? If so, consider whether avoidance might be playing a role in this narrowing. The good news in all this is that avoidant patterns, despite their tenacity, can be changed. The impacts we've discussed aren't inevitable or permanent. With awareness and appropriate support, people can expand their lives beyond the limitations that avoidance has created. Now that we understand the significant impact avoidant patterns can have, let's explore how to recognize these tendencies in yourself, the essential first step toward positive change. How to recognize it in yourself. Recognizing avoidant patterns in yourself can be challenging for several reasons. These behaviors often develop gradually, become habitual over time, and may be rationalized as simply being cautious or introverted. Additionally, the very nature of avoidance includes turning away from uncomfortable self-awareness, making it particularly difficult to see these patterns clearly. Let's explore some approaches to help you recognize whether avoidance might be playing a significant role in your life. Self-reflection questions. Take a moment with each of these questions. Try to respond not with your first defensive reaction, but with honest self-observation. There are no wrong answers here, just opportunities for greater self-understanding. About your emotional life. Do you find it difficult to identify what you're feeling beyond basic categories like good or bad? When you experience painful emotions, what's your typical first response? To analyze them? Distract yourself? Talk to someone? Sit with them? Are there certain emotions you're comfortable experiencing and expressing, and others that feel dangerous or overwhelming? When was the last time you allowed yourself to be fully vulnerable with someone you trust? About your thought patterns. Do you find yourself frequently imagining worst-case scenarios? How often do you engage in mind reading, assuming you know what others think of you, usually negatively? Do you have persistent thoughts about your own inadequacy compared to others? When you make a mistake, how long do you typically ruminate on it? How often do you dismiss compliments or positive feedback as merely politeness or luck? About your behavior patterns. Are there specific types of situations you consistently avoid or endure with significant distress? How often do you cancel plans or create excuses to avoid social situations? Do you frequently use alcohol or other substances to feel comfortable in social settings? How often do you say yes to things you don't want to do to avoid potential conflict? When was the last time you tried something new where you might fail or look foolish? About your relationship patterns. Do your close relationships tend to follow similar patterns or encounter similar problems? How comfortable are you with conflict in relationships? What's your typical response when disagreements arise? Do you find it easier to be there for others than to allow others to support you? How much of your authentic self do you share with the people closest to you? When relationships become emotionally intense, what's your typical response? Take a moment to notice if any of these questions produced a strong emotional reaction or recognition. Sometimes our bodies know before our minds do, a sensation of tightness, a sinking feeling, or even tears can signal that we've touched on something significant. Common rationalizations. Another way to recognize avoidant patterns is to become aware of the ways we justify or rationalize avoidance to ourselves. These aren't bad or wrong, they're understandable protective mechanisms, but recognizing them can help us see avoidance more clearly. I'm just being realistic. Avoidance often disguises itself as practicality or realism. I'm not avoiding asking for a promotion, I'm just being realistic about my chances. While reasonable assessment of situations is healthy, realism, that consistently leads to inaction or playing it safe may be rationalized avoidance. I'm just an introvert. Introversion is a legitimate personality trait involving preference for less stimulating environments and need for solitude to recharge. However, sometimes avoidance hides behind the label of introversion. The key difference: introversion is about preference, while avoidance is about fear. An introvert might prefer a quiet dinner with close friends over a large party but can enjoy both. Someone using introversion to mask avoidance feels genuinely anxious or threatened by the larger gathering. I'm too busy right now. Busyness is one of the most socially acceptable forms of avoidance in our culture. While legitimate time constraints exist, consistently prioritizing tasks over experiences that involve emotional risk may indicate avoidance. Notice if "I don't have time" is your automatic response to opportunities that would require vulnerability or potential rejection. I need more information before I decide. Preparation and information gathering are valuable, to a point. When they become endless prerequisites for action, however, they may serve avoidance. If you find yourself perpetually researching but never acting, or always needing just a little more information before making decisions, avoidance may be at play. I'm just being independent. Self-reliance is generally viewed positively in many cultures. However, extreme independence, never asking for help, refusing support, insisting on doing everything alone, can be a form of relational avoidance. Healthy independence includes the capacity to be interdependent when appropriate. I just have high standards. Perfectionism often masquerades as excellence or high standards. While striving for quality is positive, perfectionism that prevents completion or sharing of work, or that maintains impossibly high self-expectations, often serves avoidance of potential criticism or failure. It's just not the right time. Timing considerations are legitimate, but if it's never the right time to have that difficult conversation, start that creative project, or pursue that relationship, avoidance may be the underlying issue. The perfect time rarely arrives on its own. Behavioral patterns to watch for. Beyond thoughts and rationalizations, certain behavioral patterns can signal avoidant tendencies. Procrastination. Chronic procrastination, especially on tasks involving potential evaluation or judgment, often indicates avoidance. This isn't about occasional delays but a persistent pattern of postponing certain types of activities, particularly those involving potential failure or criticism. Excessive preparation. Preparation is valuable, but when it becomes disproportionate to the situation, spending hours preparing for a 10-minute meeting, rehearsing casual conversations in advance, over-researching minor decisions, it may serve to manage anxiety rather than enhance performance. Safety behaviors. These are subtle behaviors that help someone endure anxiety-provoking situations rather than avoiding them completely. Examples include: always bringing a friend to social events. Having escape plans ready for social situations. Staying on the periphery of gatherings. Using phones as shields in social settings. Only engaging in activities where you know you'll excel. While these behaviors allow participation rather than complete avoidance, they prevent full engagement and reinforcement learning. Deflection and change of subject. Pay attention to patterns in conversation. Do you consistently steer conversations away from certain topics, particularly those involving emotions or personal disclosure? Do you reflexively change the subject when discussions become personally uncomfortable? Relief when plans cancel. Most people occasionally feel relief when demanding commitments are cancelled. However, if you regularly feel disproportionate relief when social plans fall through, not because you're tired but because you're escaping anticipated discomfort, this may signal avoidance. All-or-nothing commitments. Sometimes avoidance manifests not as complete withdrawal but as unsustainable overcommitment followed by burning out and withdrawal. This cycling pattern can masquerade as enthusiasm followed by necessary recovery, when it's actually approach followed by avoidance. Physical and emotional signals. Our bodies often recognize avoidance patterns before our conscious minds do. Pay attention to physical tension patterns. Where do you hold tension in your body? Common areas for anxiety-related tension include the jaw, shoulders, stomach, and chest. Notice if certain types of situations consistently trigger tension in these areas. Sleep disruptions. Do you experience difficulty falling asleep before certain types of events or commitments? Do you wake up with racing thoughts about upcoming situations that involve potential evaluation or rejection? Relief-based decisions. Notice whether your choices are more often motivated by pursuing what you want or avoiding discomfort. If relief is your primary emotional reward, the exhale of escaping a potentially difficult situation, avoidance may be driving your decisions. Emotional numbing. Pay attention to periods where you feel disconnected from your emotions or unusually flat. While there are many causes of emotional numbing, it can sometimes be a defense mechanism against uncomfortable feelings that might otherwise lead to needed but difficult actions. Feedback from others. Sometimes those close to us can see patterns we miss in ourselves. Consider whether you've received feedback like, "You always have an excuse when we invite you out. I never know what you're really thinking or feeling. You seem to disappear when things get difficult. You're hard to get close to. You always change the subject when I try to talk about our relationship." While external feedback shouldn't be taken as definitive truth about your internal experience, patterns in how others experience you can provide valuable clues about behaviors you might not recognize in yourself. A compassionate approach to self-recognition. If you've recognized some avoidant patterns in yourself while reading this section, I want to emphasize something important: these patterns develop for understandable reasons. They were adaptive responses to circumstances you faced, often beginning in childhood or adolescence when you had limited resources for handling difficult situations. Recognizing avoidance isn't about criticizing yourself for these patterns but about bringing compassionate awareness to behaviors that might now be limiting you more than protecting you. As psychologist Carl Rogers observed, the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. This acceptance doesn't mean resignation to patterns that cause suffering, quite the opposite. It means creating the conditions of safety and self-compassion in which change becomes possible. With this compassionate self-awareness as our foundation, let's explore approaches to working with and gradually transforming avoidant patterns. How to overcome avoidant behavior. Changing avoidant patterns requires courage, persistence, and usually some form of support. The good news is that decades of psychological research and clinical experience have identified effective approaches to working with these deeply ingrained tendencies. Let's explore a range of strategies, from self-help approaches to professional interventions, that can help transform avoidance into engagement. Understanding the change process. Before diving into specific techniques, it's helpful to understand some principles about how change typically occurs with avoidant patterns. Change is gradual. Unlike some behaviors that can change through single decisions, avoidant patterns typically transform through consistent small steps rather than dramatic leaps. This gradual approach is actually more sustainable, as it allows your nervous system to adjust and develop new response patterns over time. Discomfort is part of the process. There's no way around it. Changing avoidant patterns involves experiencing the very discomfort you've been avoiding. The goal isn't to eliminate anxiety but to develop the capacity to act effectively even when anxiety is present. As psychologist Susan Jeffers titled her influential book, it's about feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Setbacks are normal. The path out of avoidance isn't linear. Expect periods of progress followed by temporary returns to familiar avoidant patterns, especially during times of stress. These setbacks aren't failures but normal parts of the change process and opportunities for deeper learning. Multiple approaches work better than single strategies. Research suggests that combining different approaches, cognitive, behavioral, emotional, and social, creates more robust change than relying on any single method. The strategies below can be used in complementary ways. Therapeutic approaches. Professional support can be invaluable in changing entrenched avoidant patterns. Several evidence-based therapies have proven particularly effective. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. CBT is one of the most researched approaches for anxiety and avoidance. It works by helping identify and modify the thoughts that fuel avoidant behaviors, while gradually facing feared situations in a structured way. Key CBT techniques include cognitive restructuring, identifying and challenging unhelpful thoughts, like catastrophizing or mind reading, that drive avoidance. Exposure therapy, systematically facing feared situations in a gradual, controlled manner. Behavioral experiments, testing negative predictions to gather evidence that challenges anxiety-driven beliefs. Research consistently shows CBT to be effective for various anxiety disorders and avoidant patterns, with some studies showing success rates of 60 to 80% for certain conditions. Acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. ACT takes a somewhat different approach, focusing less on changing thoughts and more on changing your relationship to them. It emphasizes accepting uncomfortable internal experiences while committing to actions aligned with personal values. Key ACT concepts and techniques include cognitive diffusion, learning to observe thoughts rather than being caught up in them. Mindful awareness, developing the capacity to notice experiences without automatically reacting. Values clarification, identifying what truly matters to you to guide behavior change. Committed action, taking steps aligned with values even when difficult emotions arise. ACT has shown strong evidence for effectiveness with anxiety, depression, and avoidant coping styles, with some studies suggesting it may be particularly valuable for those who haven't responded fully to other approaches. Schema therapy. Developed specifically for entrenched personality patterns, schema therapy integrates cognitive, behavioral, attachment, and emotion-focused approaches. It's particularly helpful for understanding and working with the early life experiences that often underlie avoidant patterns. Key concepts in schema therapy include early maladaptive schemas, persistent self-defeating patterns that begin in childhood. Schema modes, different emotional and behavioral states that get activated in various situations. Limited reparenting, providing in a therapeutic relationship what was missing in early attachment relationships. Mode work, identifying and working with different parts of the self that emerge in triggering situations. While research on schema therapy is less extensive than for CBT, evidence suggests it may be particularly effective for long-standing personality patterns, including avoidant tendencies. Psychodynamic approaches. Longer-term psychodynamic therapy can help uncover and work through the unconscious conflicts and early relationship patterns that often underlie avoidant behaviors. While the process may take longer than more symptom-focused approaches, it can create profound and lasting change. Key elements include developing insight into how past experiences influence current patterns. Working through painful emotions that have been avoided. Using the therapeutic relationship as a safe context to experience and work with attachment patterns. Integration of disowned aspects of the self. Meta-analyses suggest that psychodynamic approaches, while sometimes taking longer to show initial effects, often result in benefits that continue to increase after therapy ends. Group therapy. Group therapy provides a uniquely valuable context for working with avoidant patterns, as it offers live practice of social skills in a supportive environment. Immediate feedback on interpersonal patterns. Normalization of struggles through hearing others' experiences. Opportunity to practice vulnerability gradually. Support from peers who understand similar challenges. Research suggests that group therapy can be as effective as individual therapy for many conditions, and sometimes more effective for issues with strong interpersonal components. Self-help strategies. While professional support is often valuable, many effective strategies can be implemented on your own or with informal support. Gradual exposure. The principle of gradually facing feared situations, central to therapeutic approaches like CBT, can be applied as a self-help strategy. Create an avoidance hierarchy, list situations you avoid, ranking them from least to most anxiety-provoking. Start with manageable challenges, begin with situations that cause mild anxiety, 3 to 4 out of 10. Practice repeatedly, stay in each situation long enough to experience some natural reduction in anxiety. Move gradually up your hierarchy, as lower-level challenges become manageable, progress to more difficult ones. Use relaxation techniques during exposure to help manage anxiety. For example, if you avoid social gatherings, you might start by attending a small gathering with a trusted friend for a predetermined short time, then gradually work toward larger events and staying longer. Mindfulness practices. Regular mindfulness practice can help develop the capacity to notice uncomfortable thoughts and feelings without automatically reacting to them. Research shows that mindfulness can reduce anxiety and increase psychological flexibility, the ability to persist with valued actions even when uncomfortable. Effective mindfulness approaches include formal meditation, even 5 to 10 minutes daily of focused attention on breath or body sensations. Mindful observation of avoidance urges, noticing the thoughts and physical sensations that precede avoidant behaviors. RAIN practice, recognize, allow, investigate, and non-identify with difficult emotional states. Mindful daily activities, bringing full attention to routine activities like eating or walking. Apps like Headspace, Calm, or Insight Timer offer structured guidance for developing mindfulness practices. Self-compassion practices. Self-compassion, treating yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend, is particularly important when working with avoidant patterns, which often involve harsh self-criticism. Psychologist Kristen Neff's research identifies 3 components of self-compassion. Self-kindness, treating yourself with care rather than criticism. Common humanity, recognizing that suffering and struggle are universal human experiences. Mindfulness, holding painful experiences in balanced awareness without suppression or exaggeration. Simple self-compassion practices include using kind self-talk during difficult moments. Placing a hand on your heart during stress to activate the self-soothing system. Writing self-compassionate letters to yourself. Asking, what would I say to a friend in this situation? Research shows that self-compassion practices can reduce anxiety, depression, and shame, emotions often associated with avoidance. Journaling approaches. Structured writing exercises can help identify patterns, process emotions, and develop new perspectives. Avoidance tracking, record situations you avoid, the thoughts and feelings that arise, and the consequences of avoidance. Cognitive restructuring, write down anxiety-provoking thoughts, identify cognitive distortions, and develop more balanced perspectives. Values exploration, write about what genuinely matters to you and how avoidance may conflict with these values. Future self, write a letter from your future self who has overcome limiting avoidance patterns. James Pennebaker's research on expressive writing shows that even brief periods of writing about difficult experiences can improve psychological and physical health. Body-based approaches. Since anxiety and avoidance involve physical responses, somatic, body-based approaches can be valuable. Tension scanning, regularly check your body for tension and consciously release it. Diaphragmatic breathing, practice slow, deep belly breathing to activate the parasympathetic nervous system. Progressive muscle relaxation, systematically tense and release muscle groups to reduce physical anxiety. Regular exercise, particularly activities that combine movement with mindfulness, like yoga or Tai Chi. Research consistently shows that regular physical activity has anxiety-reducing effects comparable to medication for some individuals. Life domain strategies. Beyond general approaches, specific strategies can help address avoidance in particular life domains. For relationship avoidance. Start with scheduled vulnerability, planned conversations where you share something slightly personal. Practice naming emotions out loud, even simple ones like, I feel disappointed, or, I'm feeling nervous. Set small goals for expressing needs or preferences that might create conflict. Consider relationship coaching or couples therapy even when things are stable, not just in crisis. For career and achievement avoidance. Use the 5-minute rule, commit to just 5 minutes of a dreaded task, then reassess. Develop accountability partnerships where you report progress to someone else. Break projects into very small steps to reduce avoidance of large goals. Practice separating performance from self-worth through conscious self-talk. For social avoidance. Use social experiments with predetermined time limits and exit strategies. Practice conversation starters and questions to reduce uncertainty anxiety. Join structured social activities, classes, volunteer work, where interactions have clear contexts. Use anxiety management techniques before social events rather than avoidance. For emotional avoidance, create an emotions inventory to expand your vocabulary for feelings. Practice the 90-second rule, fully experiencing emotions for at least 90 seconds before acting. Use creative expression, art, music, movement, to access emotions that are difficult to verbalize. Develop a specific meditation practice focused on emotional awareness. Building your support system. Changing avoidant patterns is challenging work that benefits greatly from support. Professional support. Consider working with a therapist specialized in anxiety or personality patterns. A coach focused on specific domains like social skills or career development. Support groups specific to anxiety or avoidance issues. Online therapy options if in-person services are limited or themselves trigger avoidance. Personal support. Cultivate relationships that support your growth. Identify friends who balance acceptance with gentle encouragement. Be selective about who you share your change efforts with. Consider finding an accountability buddy working on similar goals. Explicitly ask for the kind of support that helps you most. Community resources. Many communities offer resources that can support change. Community education classes for practicing social skills. Toastmasters or similar groups for public speaking practice. Volunteer opportunities that encourage gradual social engagement. Spiritual or meditation communities that support emotional development. Digital resources. Technology offers various ways to supplement other supports. Apps specifically designed for anxiety or exposure practice. Online communities focused on overcoming avoidance. Teletherapy options for more accessible professional support. Digital courses on specific skills like assertiveness or emotional regulation. Creating a personalized change plan. With these various approaches in mind, consider creating a structured plan for addressing your particular avoidant patterns. 1. Assess your patterns. Identify specific situations you tend to avoid. Note the thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations that arise. Consider the short and long-term consequences of these patterns. 2. Set specific, measurable goals. Focus on behavioral goals rather than feeling-based ones. Make goals small enough to be achievable but significant enough to matter. Include time frames and specific contexts. 3. Select compatible strategies. Choose approaches that fit your preferences and resources. Combine cognitive, behavioral, emotional, and social strategies. Consider both short-term coping skills and long-term change approaches. 4. Create accountability structures. Determine how you'll track progress. Identify who will support your efforts. Plan for regular review and adjustment of your approach. 5. Prepare for setbacks. Identify potential triggers or high-risk situations. Develop contingency plans for difficult periods. Create self-compassion reminders for when struggles occur. A note about medication. For some individuals, medication can be a helpful component of addressing avoidant patterns, particularly when anxiety is severe enough to prevent engagement with psychological approaches. Common medications that may help manage anxiety associated with avoidance include selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. Serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, SNRIs. Beta blockers, particularly for performance-specific anxiety. Benzodiazepines, for short-term use in specific situations. Important considerations regarding medication. Medication decisions should be made in consultation with healthcare providers. Medication works best when combined with psychological approaches. Benefits and potential side effects should be carefully weighed. Medication can create a window of opportunity for psychological work rather than being a complete solution. Celebrating progress. As you work to change avoidant patterns, it's crucial to recognize and celebrate progress, even small steps. Acknowledge each instance of facing rather than avoiding discomfort. Notice secondary gains like increased energy from reducing avoidance. Document changes others observe in you. Compare current capabilities to your starting point, not to an idealized end goal. Progress with avoidant patterns often follows what psychologists call a logarithmic curve, substantial early changes followed by more gradual improvement. This is normal and reflects the increasing subtlety of the work as obvious avoidance diminishes. Remember that changing avoidant patterns isn't about becoming fearless, it's about developing the capacity to act in accordance with your values even when fear is present. Every time you choose to approach rather than avoid, you're not just addressing a specific situation but building neural pathways that make future courage more accessible. The journey from avoidance to engagement isn't easy, but it opens doors to a fuller, richer life experience, one where protection no longer comes at the cost of connection, growth, and authenticity. Now, let's explore how those who care about someone with avoidant tendencies can provide effective support without inadvertently reinforcing avoidance patterns. Tips for supporting someone with avoidant traits. If someone you care about shows signs of avoidant personality patterns, your relationship with them can be either a powerful catalyst for positive change or an unwitting reinforcement of limiting patterns. The difference often lies in understanding how to support effectively without enabling avoidance or triggering defensiveness. Let's explore how to be truly helpful to someone struggling with avoidant tendencies. Understanding your role and limitations. Before diving into specific strategies, it's important to clarify what support can and cannot accomplish. You cannot fix someone else's avoidance. Change must ultimately come from within the individual. No amount of pushing, persuading, or protecting can substitute for their own readiness and commitment to change. Your role is to provide conditions that make change more possible, not to make it happen through your own efforts. Your own reactions matter. Your responses to someone's avoidance can either reinforce these patterns or gently challenge them. Becoming aware of your own emotional reactions is essential for effective support. Do you feel frustrated and try to push them? Do you become overprotective and handle everything for them? These natural reactions can inadvertently strengthen avoidant patterns. Support is not equal to accommodation. While compassion is essential, there's an important distinction between supporting someone through change and accommodating patterns in ways that enable their continuation. True support often involves both acceptance of the person and appropriate challenges to limiting behaviors. Effective communication approaches. How you communicate with someone about their avoidant tendencies can dramatically influence their receptiveness to change. Use non-judgmental observation. When discussing avoidant behaviors, focus on specific observations rather than global character judgments. Instead of, "You're just afraid of being judged." Try, "What goes through your mind when you think about attending that event?" Validate emotions while discussing behaviors. Separate acceptance of feelings from endorsement of avoidant responses. It makes complete sense that situation feels intimidating, and I'm wondering if there might be ways to approach it that feel manageable for you. As we reach the end of our journey exploring avoidance behavior, I want to take a moment to speak directly to those of you who might be sitting there with a growing realization. Perhaps you've recognized yourself in some of what we've discussed today. Maybe you've had that uncomfortable moment of clarity where patterns in your life suddenly make sense. First, I want to say, that recognition is not a burden, it's a gift. Awareness is always the first step toward change. The fact that you're here, listening and reflecting, shows tremendous courage. It's far easier to continue avoiding than to face these truths about ourselves. I've spoken with many people over the years who have walked the path from avoidance to engagement with life, and there's something they all share: not a single one regrets facing their fears. Not one wishes they had stayed hidden. The journey wasn't easy for any of them, but the freedom they found on the other side was worth every uncomfortable step. Remember that overcoming avoidant tendencies isn't about becoming fearless, it's about developing a different relationship with fear. It's about learning that you can feel afraid and still move forward. That discomfort doesn't have to be your prison. That your worth isn't determined by others' judgment. For those of you who recognize mild avoidant tendencies in yourself, small steps truly do add up. Each time you choose to speak up rather than stay silent, each time you enter a social situation despite your anxiety, each time you put yourself forward for an opportunity, you're rewiring neural pathways. You're teaching your brain that engagement brings rewards that avoidance never could. And for those dealing with more severe avoidance or diagnosed avoidant personality disorder, please know that you deserve professional support. There's no shame in reaching out, in fact, it's one of the bravest things you can do. Treatment works. People do get better. Your life can expand in ways that might seem impossible from where you stand now. I believe that inside every person with avoidant tendencies lies a wealth of untapped potential, thoughts unshared, connections unmade, joys unexperienced. The world needs what only you can offer. Your voice. Your perspective. Your presence. Life becomes richer when we step out of the shadows of avoidance. Colors become brighter. Connections become deeper. The very pain we've been avoiding loses its power when we finally turn to face it. If you're taking steps to overcome avoidance, no matter how small, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Growth isn't linear, and there will be setbacks along the way. Be gentle with yourself on the difficult days, but keep moving forward. Freedom awaits you. If this video resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone who might benefit. Your experiences and insights matter too, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. And if you'd like to continue this conversation, subscribe to the channel for more videos on personal growth and mental health. Thank you for spending this time with me today. Remember, a life beyond avoidance is possible. And you deserve to live it fully.